don't we go ahead and jump into the class here, this upcoming rookie class? I feel like that this is kind of the crown jewel of this class, where I feel like that every year there's kind of that one position that kind of stands out above the rest, and I feel like this wide receiver class might be that. It is super. I think at the top you have some elite options, and then from there I think there's a lot of depth in this class. But I think today we're going to try to talk about, necessarily may not be our individual top 12 wide receivers, but more so just kind of I think the more consistent top 12 guys right now in this class. And then with this being pre-combine, so we don't have all the numbers right now. We don't have kind of the stuff that we kind of look forward to be able to build off some of these guys. But right now I think we can at least take a look at a few things into this class and kind of take a look at it. So I think first things first, I think the most obvious is, I think in this class, I think for everybody, for the most part, is either CeeDee Lamb and Jeudy as the top two guys in this class. Who are you? Are you Team Lamb or Team Jeudy heading into this so far right now?
Oh, I was going to say I'm definitely Team Lamb. I'm there. I think he has a really good ascending profile when we look at the numbers, and he's absolutely physically dominant. He's a guy that I really I really enjoy watching. He's a guy that I really enjoy studying in terms of data. So he's in my tier 1 for sure, solidified absolutely. And I think when we factor in a little bit of draft capital there as well, he's going to be a guy that you're definitely going to want to spend those early firsts on in fantasy.
Yeah, I have Lamb 1 as well. I just think as polished and refined as Jeudy is, and don't get me wrong, I think we're kind of splitting hairs here a little bit, and I think the hate on Jeudy has gone a little too far. He was the wide receiver 1 for at least a season and a half, and then all of a sudden we get to this point every year in the off season, and it's now all of a sudden it's somebody else. And Jeudy, not only is he not 1 or 2, he's down like 5 now. It's what we do every single year. But for me, Lamb just I think he has a little bit more room to grow. I think his upside is a little bit higher because he's not as refined and nuanced of a route runner as Jeudy is. I think what we're looking at Jeudy, like that's what he's going to be, and that's still a really good prospect. But if I'm picking one, I'm going Lamb over Jeudy. But if I end up with Jeudy and 4 or 5 in my dynasties, I'm not gonna be crying any rivers, that's for sure.
Well, one, I guess with Jeudy, you kind of look at him, and you're right. It feels like that all of a sudden now you're seeing people put him at like 6, 7, 8 in their rankings and all this, and I'm like, where did this come from? Why did this all of a sudden start happening with him? Where I think over the last year, like he has kind of been a consistent guy, and then all of a sudden, I think people do it sometimes just to get cute, be contrarian, and this feels like a spot where there's really no point in being contrarian with this take. I know there are some concerns with his profile. But, especially, I guess most notably, would be his BMI that I think people are most concerned with. Is that something that you're concerned with at all?
If we're talking BMI, no. I don't heavily weight body mass index into my evaluation process. I'm a pure production kind of guy. So if we're talking just purely in a vacuum, Lamb over Jeudy, I don't hate either one. But I think CeeDee is obviously the superior talent there. I also want to go and go on record and say that I don't think it's very contrarian if you are looking at the overall scope of Jerry Jeudy and his profile. I don't think it's very contrarian to have him maybe 4th or 5th on your list. I think anywhere below that is we're kind of getting into the weeds there, but there are some prospects that I do like from an analytical standpoint a little bit more, as well as on tape, a little bit more than Jerry Jeudy. This is going to be a class where it's going to come down to where these guys get drafted and where the proper draft cap lands for these guys. So right now, I think that it's not necessarily contrarian to have him a little bit lower than in the middle of that top 10, or at the very least, I would say maybe middle's a little bit too egregious, but about that top 4, top 5. Anybody that has him in that one spot, I definitely do think we're probably overbiting a little bit on the profile and maybe the air quotes route running and the refinement at which he's a polished receiver. I won't argue with that, but the numbers tell a little bit of a different story. So in terms of that, but back to the original question though, the BMI is not something that I wait until after I get proper combine measurements and I get everything official. And even then, I don't weight it very much. I do weight the production overall. I know a lot of people do weight the BMI though. I think that concerns a lot of people. And if we're looking at it from Jerry Jeudy's perspective, he's not going to grade out very well in terms of his overall build.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's going to be, I think that is one thing to take into consideration is taking a look at things like that. Because, I mean, you look at the rest of his profile, I mean, he basically, he's coming in 6'1", 192 at a 25% dominator rating. I liked, the 17.2 yards per reception, the 19.4 breakout age that he had, and obviously the 25% target share that he had there. Especially, I mean, his numbers, I think also, I mean, just from this last year that he had, I mean, from an offense that typically is more run first, I don't hate the numbers that I saw from him, but I do think that in terms of, I think he has one of the highest floors in this class, in my opinion, and then I think you can make a case for some of these guys maybe possibly have a higher ceiling.
I definitely agree there. I do think he's a safe prospect. He's a lock to go round one, and I think that's where a lot of the value is going to come. We see the highest hit rates. I mean, he has a young breakout age. He has a sustainable market share overall. I think when you look at the analytical profile, I don't think it's a question on whether or not he's going to produce. I think it's going to be a question of how much he produces. And I think right now where a lot of the overcomplication in his profile comes from is people thinking he's this otherworldly prospect when I don't see that with him. I definitely don't. And interestingly enough, when it comes to BMI and stuff, I do have a little bit of a theory, and I have not studied this at all yet. I know people that are probably better suited to go with BMI, but the one thing that I would probably look for the most is to see where these guys who have low BMI like Jerry Jeudy are being drafted. How many of them are being drafted in the first round and are getting that first round pedigree volume? Because that's where we see the highest hit rates for guys in the NFL and in fantasy in general with the low breakout age and high draft capital. So the BMI kind of being linked to draft capital would be something that I'd be very interested in learning a little bit more about, because I think the kind of age or the age-old prototype of an X wide receiver is slowly starting to change. We see guys like Tyreek Hill, Marquise Brown really coming out with smaller statures but speed guys, really fast, really good route runners, and they're kind of changing the game as to where 10 to 15 years ago these teams are spending first-round draft picks on guys who are 6'4", 220 because they want that big physical X wide receiver that they can throw the ball up to and they can play the sideline and they can go into the red zone and score those touchdowns. So I'd be interested in the trend there and to see if how many guys that do have Jerry Jeudy's BMI are having this first round draft capital, and how much of a sample can we get there to kind of throw correlation in there and see if these guys are even getting a chance and how much of them are successful if they do. So that would be kind of my take on the BMI and why I'm not weighting it enough and why I should probably do a little bit more digging on that. But it's interesting stuff when we break it down that way.
No, I totally agree with that and everything. So I guess let's jump over to CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he's certainly, I think for a lot of people, is actually probably the number one prospect here. The dude is a monster. What about Lamb do you find so attractive? And do you think Julio Jones is an outlandish comp for him?
So I think I don't know. I do see some similarities when we're looking at Julio Jones and CeeDee Lamb. But for the most part, I think that we see with Julio Jones, we see dominance in when he was on the field. We see dominance throughout his college profile coming into the NFL. He did miss a couple games. He's coming in as a younger prospect than Julio Jones. So he'll come in about a year younger than Julio. But when we look at both of their profiles kind of side by side, there's a dip in Julio Jones' second season as a sophomore. And we see a little bit of a dip in production after a really productive age 19 year. And then he comes back at age 21, and he kind of reestablishes himself as just a really, really strong wide receiver. But when we compare that to kind of CeeDee Lamb, we see just CeeDee Lamb, his freshman season, did not do a whole lot. He did a lot more than other freshman wide receivers in this class. If we're not talking about Jalen Reagor and Bryan Edwards comparably, but overall we just see more of an ascending profile for CeeDee. So he came in and he logged about 15% of the overall receiving yards at Oklahoma at age 18, which is great. Didn't pass the threshold for a breakout, but then he grabbed 25% and then 31 at age 19 and 20, and then seemingly continued to just ascend after that freshman season. With Julio, we kind of see a really, really strong age 19 season, and then we see a dip in production at age 20, and then 21 he kind of shoots back up. So they are sort of comparable, but I would say Lamb has just more of an ascending profile. And if we look at Julio's, it's kind of a dip there. And then I would say, height is probably the big comparable there. CeeDee does not have the weight that Julio does. I believe Julio's sitting about 220, 225, give or take. And CeeDee Lamb is probably projected to come in about that 195 to 200 range. So Julio's got a little bit more of that thickness, a little bit more of that that prototypical build that we talked about. But both of them have really 3 strong years Julio has 3 strong years of production in college. CeeDee has 2. It's kind of hard to compare them from an analytical perspective, but I don't think it's super outlandish if that's where you want to go. But Julio is also a unicorn, so I would tread carefully there. We don't get very many of him in our class, guys that are in draft classes, guys that can continuously do it year in and year out. So not outlandish, but I would be careful there.
Just a quick question I had on your process. How much do you weight the combine when it comes to, building your pre-draft models and that sort of thing? Because when I saw this question, that was like the one thing that jumped out to me. Like, I'm awful with comps. I hate comps. Like, it's just something like I'm not comfortable with. But the main thing that jumped out to me was their size, and I don't expect Lamb to test anywhere close to what Julio did. I mean, he was 6'3", 220 and ran a 4'3", 440. I don't see that kind of athleticism in Lamb's profile. How much do you take the combine into your pre-draft process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say that it's definitely useful to get a really good gauge on what these guys are physically capable of doing, but I wouldn't say I weight it that much. And I'll just be completely honest. I don't mind people that do, but when we just look at I'll always come back to this. Look at the production and the numbers that player X has put up. Look at what CeeDee Lamb has done in college. Look at what Jeudy has done in college. Laviska Shenault, we can go down the list. Look at what they did in college. It's very clear to me that Laviska Shenault is not going to be a 4-2 guy, but he didn't need to be. He didn't need to be an overall athletically gifted wide receiver. He's not going to run out of Indy at, beating Henry Ruggs' speed score, but it didn't stop him from being productive at a young age and from being able to solidify his role as a top player for Colorado. So when I look at the numbers that these players post, I think it's good to have a good baseline of physical thresholds that we want these players to reach and we want them to meet. But I don't weight it against a player. I think that if you're high on a player when he goes into the combine, just because he has a poor combine does not mean that he's going to be a bad player. Always revert back to the production, because the bottom line is whatever discrepancies that the player that you love or don't like had in speed, agility, in measurements and jumping, that didn't or it did play a factor in how they produce. And you can tell that by what they've put up in terms of age adjusted numbers and overall statistics in general. So I definitely it's not a make or break for me, but I think it's good to get a like I said, a baseline of what these guys are capable of doing physically, because football is a physical game. You have to be able to physically win against the competition around you. So I definitely think it's useful, but I don't weight it as much as other people.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I know even I did it with the Julio Jones thing, but it often seems like with comps that people try, like it's always like let's put these people as comparable to like the best ever, and it's like, yeah, this guy reminds me of Calvin Johnson or stuff like that. I'm like, why? Like you can't come up with anybody better than that. I understand that some of the stuff that when it comes to comps that you're kind of just saying like, certain traits that a player has like remind you of them or certain things, and it's not necessarily saying that player is going to reach that type of level. But at the same time, I don't know. It even feels like with guys like I remember Ronald Jones a couple years ago. Everyone was saying he's Jamal Charles. I'm like, I don't know what you're seeing right now to come up with that, but like I never saw any ounce of Jamal Charles outside of, I guess they both had dreads, and I guess that was about it. Because other than that, like there was nothing comparable to me in those two prospects. But I think that a lot of times with comps, I think sometimes it can get a little outlandish and a little off base with some of these guys. Because it seems like when you like will go through and listen to people, and it's like every single prospect, like you could go through 20 wide receivers and they're all like high profile wide receivers. I'm like, okay, we all know that these top 20 wide receivers are not all going to hit. I don't know. So anyways, that's just my little thing with comps. I didn't mean to do it with the Julio Jones thing, but I just heard a lot of people put that out there that he reminds them of Julio Jones. So